Alright guys, finally finished testing Fern, and yeah, this one way longer than usual. Tested her damage, compared her with Stark, checked her mana efficiency, the best approach I found, checked the best cores, the artifacts that might actually work best for her, the rotation, the synergies. I did so many tests this time due to the complicated situation of Fern and the fire team in general, which I'm also going to explain later. So in this video, we're breaking everything down and I'll share with you everything I know. Before we begin, don't forget to support in the SLA Content Creator Program. If you love these kinds of content and want to help me out too, would really appreciate it. And we've also got 2,000 Essence Stones soon for supporters. And once again, thank you so much, especially to our top 10 here. I have lots of longtime supporters and guild mates here too. Really appreciate the support, guys. And with that, let's begin. So let's start with the basics real quick. Just a few important points before we get into the tests. Fern always has this buff called mana power tracking. It increases her damage dealt to bosses by 30%, and this is just similar to Boss Slayer and it's additive to other skill type multipliers. Next, I also checked the fire damage taken debuff just to be sure, and thankfully it's not a scam. It gives exactly what is stated, but keep in mind it is additive with other fire damage taken sources like from Suyun, Esil, Yuqi, and Gina. So if you've tried adding Fern into your guild boss team and you probably did not notice a massive spike like a 30% fire damage increase, is because the debuff stacks additively. Now she also has this passive called Basic Focus, which stacks up to 4 times. Each stack increases basic skill damage by 25%, but also increases MP consumption by 12%. So yeah, her mana consumption can get crazy really fast. I also checked the scaling. From 1 stack to 2 stacks, the damage increase is only about 13.5%, and that's because it is additive to her existing skill multipliers, which already include the mana power tracking buff, which is already a 60% skill type by default. So when using artifacts like Infamy, don't expect the same big jump you'd get from someone like Leonard, for example. And she also has this Magical Prodigy passive, increases attack by 20%, and when the user has 50% or more of their MP, their attack increases by 20%. So this one right here is going to be crucial because Fern has a very bad MP problem, and at some point during her rotation you might lose that 20% attack bonus from this passive. And also quick note on her MP consumption passive too, it is separate from the MP or stat. The way it works is that the MP consumption passive, like the ones from Teeth of the Watcher or this skill, applies first before getting reduced by the MPCR stat, which is calculated using Bonbon's formula. So I'll just skip this part, but if you guys want more information about this, you guys can go to the Theory Crafting channel in my Discord server so that you guys can check the formula from Bonbon and how it works. So now for her weapon, it increases crit rate and crit damage of basic skills, and every 30 seconds after using a core attack, it restores 100% of her MPs. So you can already see how it ties into her playstyle: rapid skill rotations, heavy MP use, then full recharge. And then just a few noteworthy things: she gets a 10% precision, which is huge against high level monsters, especially for new players who don't have the perfect precision gems yet. She also has a Dispel Magic effect that removes debuffs from the team, but right now it only works in Hunter's mode when she tags in. Still pretty nice utility, I think, for new players. She also has this A5 effect where the user's ultimate skill will always be fire elemental damage, although I don't know how important it is for Fern because it does seem like her ultimate is not that strong. And then the rest here are just pretty much straightforward fire damage buff and defense penetration. And lastly, she's got decent survivability. Every time she tags in, she gains a shield equal to 20% of her attack and 20% damage reduction. So yeah, now that we've covered the basics, let's move on to how I actually tested her. Now, just a quick note before we start. Fire units right now are honestly so different from one another that doing a clean one-to-one comparison has become extremely difficult to do. But for reference, we've already established before that Yu Suyun, even in Giant Statue where penetration matters most, is already weaker than Stark, who is a DPS breaker. So at this point, Yu Suyun is pretty much just another debuffer for her magic reaction in teamfights. Her damage was not there anymore when I tested her in the Valter workshop, so I decided to just remove her completely in all of the tests. Kanae, on the other hand, is gated by conditions to activate her instinct buff, so testing her will be a great challenge too. She's still fine in Power of Destruction in the Ant Queen the last time we played her, but she's also long been power crept relative to the DPSs of other elements, so we're not including her either. So for this video, we'll just focus on Esil, Stark, Gina, Yuqi, Fern, and also Frieren. So, first test, I wanted to establish baseline DPS between Stark as a breaker DPS and Fern as a pure DPS. I did an AFK guild boss run. Team B had crit rate debuffers to stabilize RNG. Stark and Fern are in near maxed gear, as balanced as I could get them, and from the results, even in Giant Statue where Stark has the penetration advantage, Fern, who had way less than him, is still way ahead in terms of damage. And that being said, do take note, outside of that, where enemies are not as tanky, Stark's advantage won't scale as well. But also do consider that in this test, Fern has been able to use her 30% increased fire damage taken advantage, but when they are both on the field, either in team fights or dungeons, Stark will be able to use that debuff too, so his damage is expected to be higher. And next, just out of curiosity, I swapped Yuqi in as the breaker instead of Esil just for test. Stark's damage stayed the same, but Fern's damage dropped a bit. And that is likely because Esil can buff Fern better with all the attack percent and attack bonus from her weapon. Yuki's buffs lean toward basic skill damage percent, which Fern does not benefit from as much. We'll explore more about this later, but for now, the key takeaway here is even though Stark outperforms older fire DPSs like Suyun or Kanae, at least here in the Giant Statue, Fern is still by far the real fire DPS powerhouse right now. Now, one of Fern's biggest problems is MP consumption. Every time she uses a basic skill or core attack, her cooldowns drop by 5 seconds, and that makes her insanely fast, but as a trade-off, she burns through MP like crazy. So the question now is, should you build max MP or MP consumption reduction? So I burned a ton of resources for this one, made multiple cores, ran 3-minute auto test with consistent setups, grid activation, min byunggu, toughness, egress, everything to keep the RNG stable. 2 runs per setup just in case something goes wrong. First test, I used 3 full MPCR cores, around 9k MP consumption reduction, 2.2k max MP, 16.5 billion damage. Next test, replaced 1 MPCR with max MP, 19 billion damage. Next test, I replaced another MPCR core, and now it reached 20.7 billion damage. This is now at 5k MPCR and 4.2k max MP. Next one, full max MP, and it's just about the same as the previous one with a balance of MP consumption reduction. Then I tried removing 1 MPCR core, damage dropped a lot. Tried a full crit damage core instead of that MPCR. It increased slightly but still not as high as the MPCR or max MP core. So what do these results tell us then? Firstly, max MP clearly matters a lot because Fern's passive gives plus 20% attack when MP is above 50%. Her weapon also refills MP completely, so having a large MP pool helps a lot. And of course, with more MP, she can continuously cast more skills. I also noticed that there's likely a balance point here. I don't know and I can't tell you the exact numbers, but from these tests, it does look like max MP at around 4k and maybe MPCR about 4k to 5k or a bit less. And since this is an auto test, manual play could shift this a bit, especially when you are rotating Fern out. But that one, I'll just do another test once I find a reliable method. Just lastly for this one, this also finally explains Stark's kit, which gives defense penetration stat. The devs most likely expects that we're gonna be using MP and MPCR core on Fern, and because of that, we're gonna lose a lot of points on other stats, and thus that defense penetration from Stark is actually huge. Her ultimate is actually kind of weird. It doesn't scale well, and in teamfight modes, timer does not stop during animation, so she loses uptime for basic skills and core attacks to regen her MP. So I tested this both ways with auto ultimate on and off, and turns out not using her ultimate actually gave slightly higher total DPS. Of course, in Hunter's mode, where time stops during ultimate animation, it's not an issue, so it's better to use it, but for content like Guild Boss or POD, it might be better to skip her ultimate. But also right now, she's not being played in Team A in GB, so it's not possible to stop that, but there might come a time that we have to. Next up, core test, controlled setup again, training room up with about 20% crit rate, grid active to simulate real fights, just the usual, and across multiple runs, crit rate core consistently came out on top both in high and mid-level enemy situations. Even when I increased total crit rate to 45% to simulate full buffs plus debuffs in a guild boss situation, crit rate core still won by a noticeable margin, so it's safe to say that it is the best core all around. And so for my final recommended cores, Ferocious for the crit versus high level dungeons, Arrogant Ruler gives a shield based on attack, and finally Teeth of the Watcher for MP consumption. Now, this is where it gets complicated. I can't really show full conclusive test results here because comparing breakers directly is inconsistent. Stark's skills on penetration and dealing damage. Esil 2 is more on penetration but relies on breaks for her debuff, and Yuqi has her own buff timing. So instead, I'm just going to share with you guys my thoughts and analysis on how I think this should go. I could be right or wrong on this, but I did try playing it a lot in the training room and Valter workshop. It's just that I couldn't find any reliable conclusive results using a reliable method. There's just so many moving parts and condition in this fire tip. So just to explain it in more detail, in the rotation, usually we start with the breaker, then switch to Gina for buffs, then Fern continues to deal damage. And once you're already at around 50%, the question here is, should you keep her on the field because she will already lose her 20% attack at this point, or rotate out early? And in my opinion, it will depend on your breaker and support setup. For example, Gina's buffs only lasts 15 seconds. Gravity boost here lasts 20 seconds, but QTEs and animation eat some time too, so it's also gonna be at about the same duration. So ideally, Fern should deal as much damage as possible while those buffs are still active, meaning her MP pool also needs to stay above 50% for that whole duration. And after that, here comes the dilemma, because if your breaker is someone like Stark, you need to give him uptime too so that he can contribute damage, because otherwise he won't be able to contribute anything to the team aside from that small amount of penetration. And so I think even though Fern can technically still deal damage, Stark may also need to complete his entire rotation. And one problem here that I notice is he won't benefit from Gina's attack buff, and the debuff duration is not enough for him because Fern as the main DPS will have to take all of it. He still does benefit from Fern's fire damage taken debuff, but without everything else, Stark might not be able to deal his full damage. Basically, overall, Gina might not be the best support in this case. On the other hand, if your breaker is Yuqi or Esil, who are more of a buffer debuffer types, you can just cast a few skills and tag out quickly, then you rotate to Gina and Fern again. Now in connection to this, your artifacts might also depend on your team rotation. If your breakers and supports are debuffers, Fern has to take more uptime because the two won't be able to deal significant damage. And because of that, Fern will likely burn her MP to near zero before rotating out. And in this case, expert set might be the better artifact choice. No MP condition, and she'll also have more time to stack it up. As compared to a breaker DPS like Stark, your rotations will be shorter and Fern's uptime will be smaller. So in that situation, she won't be able to stack much expert stacks. But in this case, her MP will also probably stay above 50% during her rotation because you're gonna have to tag out immediately, right? And in that case, the Obsidian set might actually be the better choice. And it's also worth mentioning that Fern's shield duration also limits how long she can stay on the field, so you'll probably really have to rotate out eventually. And unfortunately, it's hard to test this. Training room defense is just too low to measure penetration scaling properly. And just lastly, left side artifacts also haven't tested, but general rule, high defense enemies, of course, we use the armed set. Then most likely we will use the curse set for general use with expert. 4PC infamy set might also work, I just haven't checked the numbers yet. Anyway, this is really hard to test, very situational, but for now I think this is already a good start. Now let's talk about supports. So as I mentioned earlier, Gina barely helps Stark. Her buffs mostly favor Fern, while Stark really needs his own uptime to deal damage, and that got me thinking, what if Frieren was actually designed to support this lineup. So here's why I think that might be the case, because Frieren's Bell debuff apparently lasts 30 seconds, which perfectly covers the entire rotation window for Fern and Stark. And on top of that, she brings a ton of passive team buffs from her weapon, A2 and A4, and all of those will help Stark directly without being tied to the short duration buff and debuffs. So I tried a few different support lineups in the new workshop to see how they actually play out. First, here's what the run looks like with Gina. And the overall damage feels decent enough, but I just think it's a bit more difficult to play her with Stark and Fern. I'm gonna show you the Frieren run as well for comparison. So with Frieren, who by the way had less stats than Gina right here, but as you can see here, her shield does seem like a lot tankier, probably because she has higher defense percent scaling. And the damage actually looked better overall. That's probably likely because of her crit buff, and the defense decrease debuff from the Bell has almost permanent uptime when you play it correctly. So even though Frieren is a water unit, I think after the recent buff with the basic skill on the weapon and other stuff, I think she might just be the better fit now for this kind of team setup. And next, I also tried Esil, and this one did not go well because her break speed is extremely slow, and without an HP build, she just runs out of dashes so fast that dying is almost guaranteed. It wasn't very fun to play, so I gave up just after a few attempts. Then I tried Yuqi as a breaker, and this one honestly might be the best setup I've tried so far. Her break speed is also fast as Stark. Fern's damage actually skyrockets thanks to her fire damage taken and increased damage taken debuff, plus the buff from her ultimate, and she can trigger this really quickly. I also paired Frieren with this lineup, and the results were still very strong. So far, this is my favorite lineup, but of course we need to test this more in various situations. But yeah, summary, Gina works, but she does not really help Stark that much, even with the penetration passives. I think playing them together is not the most optimal thing. Frieren feels smoother, tankier, and I think she's better overall for the Fern plus Stark combo. I think she also provides more consistency because her debuff is almost permanent. Esil just... I don't like to play Esil anymore. Just breaking the shield takes way too much time. And Yuqi as the breaker, I think this is the strongest and probably the most balanced lineup right now. So in terms of pure fire DPS, I think Fern is really the strongest right now. I don't think Suyun or even Kanae would come close. She has a long-term value as well thanks to her fire damage taken debuff, which was added in the latest rebalancing patch, but this might only be valuable in game content like Guild Boss. In Power of Destruction in the near future, she might also replace Esil because that's 30% fire damage taken, and she can also offer damage, has high crit rate too, and can also possibly break hands super fast with her damage output. There's just one thing to keep in mind here, that she's a collab unit, so she will likely be replaced soon as the main fire DPS, and eventually she might settle into a semi-DPS debuffer role, kinda like Suyun. For the workshop, she should perform well, but also take note that the next rebalancing, as announced by the devs, I believe in one of the dev notes, is going to be the light element, and the next unit, if I'm not mistaken, is a light support. So if you're deciding between pulling for her or someone else, or saving for light for the workshop hard mode specifically, that's also something that you should consider. So yeah, that's it for now. We'll keep testing once hard mode workshop drops, and I'll update you with more refined results once I figure out a better and reliable method to get more data. Thanks so much for watching, and if you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.